Have you been wondering how these six know-it-alls got together? Well, back in 2020, after 6 months of COVID-19 pandemic isolation, Barbara Brackman decided she needed some company. She invited five quilty friends to join her for Zoom cocktail parties every other Monday evening in order to discuss the state of the country and maybe some quilts too. So convivial were the Zooms that they decided to gather virtually every week instead of every 2 weeks. Quilt soon became the main focus of these discussions, of course. Questions were raised, pondered, and discussed, debated, and occasionally settled about particular examples that were brought to the party. Julie Silber then declared that surely the public would be fascinated by their discussions. And so the six know-it-alls, a tongue firmly in cheek name, was born. It quickly became apparent that technical help was required, so Tara Miller of the Quilt District came on board. After 3 freebie sessions, the six know-it-alls, all professional quilt historians with a combined experience of a quarter of a millennium, began to charge for the programs. We're so happy you could join us. And now, here's Julie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Silber, and I'm a lover of all things antique quilts and women's history. I'm an independent and amateur historian, written some books. And today I'm going to do a follow-up to my last presentation, which was on tiled quilts, also called stonewall quilts. So just a quick recap of what I talked about last time. I was talking about tile quilts, also called stonewall, and I'm going to do a little update on what we talked about last time. So here are what are called tile quilts with other names that sometimes appear. And they're random shape pieces that are appliqued onto a light ground and create the illusion of mosaics or tiles. And what distinguishes them from other random shape pieces, quilts, is exactly this, that they're set on the background to allow the background to show through as looking like, separating them and looking like tile. So here's a couple of examples. The earliest one we knew of, or I knew of last presentation, was this one, the earliest dated one. It's dated 1873, as you can see, and up until recently, it was the earliest dated example. It was made by two sisters, younger sisters, for their older sister in Connecticut. But I had a wonderful follow-up from Bobby Finley, one of the two authors of a book on tile quilts, along with Carol Jones, who had discovered another tile quilt in the meantime, and I want to talk about that. Here it is. Quite a wonderful example that's in the Madison County Historical Society in New York. And I want to call your attention to these blocks. Well, first we'll look at a couple of details and then look very closely at a couple of blocks. This is just an incredibly charming quilt with wonderful fabrics, and as you can see, laid on in just the way we described. And I'd like to call your attention then to these two blocks that are near the center of the quilt. The top one that I've outlined here is a church, and the bottom below it is a piece that has an ink inscribed label. So let's take a look at what. Here's the church, and just a wonderful, wonderful piece. And here is the block with the label. Give you a minute just to look at the design. And here's the label. It's inscribed in ink and pretty intact. And here's what it says. to Mrs. Emily T. Gallup from the Ladies' Circle of Industry. May this quilt of many colors ever remind you of the many hands employed in building up this wall, and may it serve to unite our hearts the more closely in building up the walls of Jerusalem. Sarah A. Stevens, Secretary. And then where it was made, Essex, Connecticut, in December of 1854, a full 19 years earlier than the one dated example that we had found to date. So I thank Bobby Finley very much for bringing this to our attention. And then, you know, doing this know-it-all thing is wonderful because we hear from people and learn so much. Not only have I found this quilt through Bobby, but we had an email from one of our viewers named Molly Miles, who said this to me. Hi, Julie. Material Culture website entry on July 11th, 2021 reminded me of the white line print work of Edith Lake Wilkerson, 1868 to 1957. And Molly asks, would the technique incorporating the wood, incorporating white lines and wood block prints seem to be unique to block printers in Provincetown, Mass, circa 1915, have a connection or influence from the pre-1900 quilts featured in the July 11th topic? So this took me down a wonderful little rabbit hole. I went to look for Edith Lake Wilkerson, and this is what I found. There was a group of women who were known as the Provincetown printers, who worked in the first third of the 20th century doing what came to be called white line wood block prints. This one that we're looking at was done by the artist Edith Lake Wilkinson, who lived from 1868 to 1957. And she did it in the early part of the 20th century, in the teens. And we'll take a look at a little bit closer. It's a woodblock technique that involves carving out the white lines, or what would come out as white lines around the shapes. She's a very interesting person, and you can see here she dated it 1914. And one of the more famous of these, this is Wilkinson as well, also 1914. You can see that the shapes are outlined in the white line, which appears because it's gouged out of the wood block. Perhaps the most famous of them was a woman named Blanche Lazelle. And here she has done a woodblock print of her studio in 1933. And this is a lead mine that she did in these abstract shapes, also outlined in white. And I found this very fascinating. The one on the left was done around 1915 by Blanche Lazelle. And the image on the right is a detail of that first quilt that I showed you, made in 1854. I think it's just a fascinating idea that they might be related. There's no way to, you know, we don't know for sure. And it may not, there may be no connection at all. But it was a wonderful thing to be able to find this quilt via Bobby and bring it to your attention and bring it to my own attention. I'm just in love with this quilt. So I wonder if any of you have anything you want to add to this.
I would like to say that I've been working on regionalism. And one of the things I've been working on is samplers in New York State from applique albums. You know, we have Baltimore style, we have a Philadelphia style of name quilts. But in New York State, there are certain things you run into often. And one of them is a cat sitting there, a side view of him looking at you. And the other is a dog, a profile, kind of a big brown golden retriever, although I don't think they had golden retrievers. And here we have them both in this New York quilt. And I thought this was from Connecticut, and I kind of dismissed it. And
it is Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that certainly is a New York image. And my sort of rule of thumb on a sampler, where's it from? If it's got a cat, it's from New York. If it's got a cat and a dog and a horse and a cow, definitely from New York, but Connecticut's right next to me.
What strikes me about this is, I'm completely deeply involved with quilts from New London County, Connecticut right now in preparation for my exhibition next winter. And here we go. Essex is right next to New London County. It just seems like Connecticut just came up with the best textiles. And when I look at this, what I'm thinking of are the roots of crazy quilting, because here we have random pieces on a foundation. They're not layered the way a crazy quilt is, but it certainly seems like a reasonable precursor to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also love the steeple. I mean, if that isn't a Connecticut or Massachusetts congregational church steeple, I don't know what is. And it makes total sense that it would end up in Madison County, New York, because a lot of Connecticut people went up to, that part of New York and settled there in the first half, well, even also the second half of the 19th century. So, easily the recipient of this quilt or her children could have ended up in
I actually know something about that and didn't include it. The woman for whom the quilt was made, and Debbie, this might be of great interest to you, is the wife of the minister. And it was made for her a few months after he was, 6 months after he was installed. So he was installed in May of 1854. They married in June of 1854, and this quilt was made in December of 1854. Later, she died and he remarried and moved to Madison County, New York. That's how it got there. So it's a Connecticut quilt that went to New York with evidence.
Yeah, it's pretty great that it has the name of the sewing society or the ladies group or whatever, because that's pretty rare.
Yeah, and they do speak of walls, the building of the wall, the women coming together to build this wall. And in Connecticut, when we find these quilts, they're almost always referred to by their makers or the families as stone wall quilts, whereas other people call them tile quilts. And in Connecticut, as Sue Reich pointed out to me, there's so many stone walls everywhere that it makes sense that these would be called stone wall. I thought it was interesting that the wall came into the inscription.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the ladies sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. I wonder if it belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
I feel like I've heard that
Philadelphia
too. Yeah, as
A house of industry in
right, House
Philadelphia.
of Industry in Philadelphia, right.
That was a charity foundation.
Right.
Cool.
Well, I think we should move on, right? And I believe we're going to Alden O'Brien.
Okay. Well, I am, we are supposed to introduce ourselves this time. I am Alden O'Brien, and I am curator of costume at the DAR Museum. And I come to quilts via costume. But I've been in charge of the quilt collection for about almost 20 years now. And so I invariably present something on one or more of our quilts. And so today I want to share with you some relatively new research on indigo quilts of the 18th century. I had reason to go back and review what we thought we knew about this quilt because we're about to exhibit it in next year's exhibit. It's not a quilt exhibit, but this will be one of the objects shown in the exhibit. And, you know, you always want to see if there's any new research. Do we know any more? Can we solve a mystery? In an earlier Know-It-Alls episode, I talked about our Mary King quilt, where Debby was able to pierce through the wall that we had reached and identify the correct maker. So this resist quilt was from a very large family in upstate New York, the Vetter family. So we can't know who was the specific maker, but we can place it in a family of Dutch origin in upstate New York. And the design is one that you see in a lot of other indigo blues. Here is at Winter Tour. Lucky Winter Tour has not only the quilt, but a full set of bed hangings in the same print. And there you see a close-up of the valance. And look at the border. It's almost identical to the border on our quilt. In fact, for all we know, it had, you know, the blue edges to that border. It looks very, very similar. And although we initially thought this dated to about 1750 to 1775, we've updated that in our cataloging now to 1770 to 90, based on new cataloging done by Linda Eaton, who wrote this updated edition of Florence Montgomery's book. And so, you know, we're always learning new things. We're always checking with each other as curators to figure out if there's more new information that we should be including and updating. So there are many other indigo designs, often in two colors, that we see in a lot of different collections. These are from Winter Tour. The one at the left is one of ours. It's just a fragment from a quilt, and on the right you see one at Winter Tour. So if you're going to dye it with two colors, it's a little more complicated, and I'll get to that in a minute. But here, if you look closely at this, at a detail of our quilt, you can see it took 4 blocks to make it. And if you can't quite see that yet, the lines in red on the left here show you approximately where the lines are of each block. So you had to do each of these blocks, and then you had to coordinate the second printing to get the to make sure that the lighter color stayed light. This is resist printing, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but you have to put the paste on it to make it stay white. You dip it in the indigo, and then you have to stamp it again for wherever you don't want it to get darker, and then you stamp it again, so on and so on. But you can see where it doesn't perfectly line up. And I've circled some of the areas where you can see it's just a little bit wonky. And you can see the lines where the arrows point, where the two are trying to meet up, and they do a pretty good job, but not perfect. And there you can see it a little bit better over there. So it's got a wonderful kind of charm to it that way too. Now on the left there is an indigo resist shawl that I printed when I was in India a few years ago, and you can see that when you have these designs, you can't get the fine detail that you can in a colored direct printed block print like the one in the middle there. You can only do a more basic design, and mine is even more basic in that you get the full blue background rather than the white background, and the only thing you print is where it's going to stay white. And here you can see they're still doing it the same way they've done it since the 1300s or thereabouts. You dip it in this deep, deep dye vat, and you lay it out on the muddy, dusty ground, and you know the cows are just off to the left there. So there have been a bunch of different theories about these. For one thing, it's interesting that you never see these blue style resist prints that you see in so many American collections, in quilts and fragments and bed hangings. You never see them in England, virtually never. There's like one little stomacher of a dress that has an interlining with one of these prints. So people have literally spent decades debating whether these could have been from India or were they made in America. And for a while, Katzenberg here, and I believe this is the same Katzenberg who wrote about Baltimore album quilts. This was a different exhibit she curated. She speculated that maybe they were produced in colonial America, especially in perhaps the Hudson Valley, where so many of these quilts seem to come from. And then recently, Carrie and Lori Triplett have pointed out, very importantly, that it's not only India that has a long tradition of indigo, but West Africa had a long tradition of expertise with indigo and resist dyeing. And they speculate that enslaved West Africans may have helped colonial Americans who were interested in producing it here. And they make some really intriguing connections, but I'm not sure we really have a smoking gun. We just don't have conclusive documentation of American production of these prints. And even if Africans were teaching the white colonials their methods, these designs just don't look West African at all. They really look Indian, if anything. And then more recently than Katzenberg, but longer ago than the triplets, Margaret Ordonez and Mary Gale found a sample book in England with several patterns we can match with surviving American examples. And there's one fragment that is shown in this, that is shown here, in the Albany Institute collection, which has a custom stamp from England. So it's been thought, oh, well, it must have been imported from England. But Amelia Peck, in her recent exhibit and book Interwoven Globe, points out that it says calico. It doesn't say British manufacture. And so she says this means that it is imported into England and then later again into the colonies. So she says that she feels very strongly that it was made in, these things were made in India for the American market. And she says the reason we don't find them in England is that the designs are much too heavy-handed, much too crude, really, for the more refined English taste. Sorry, Americans, but you know, whatever. But we were happy to have them. They were colorful. They added a lot of interest and color to American colonial interiors, and we were happy to have them. So that is how we seem to be mostly cataloging them these days. And so I find this persuasive, and I'm going to say that I agree with Peck on this. So this is not to say, however, that Europe wasn't copying the Indian indigos, because here we have from Winter Tour a bunch of things that they have collected and cataloged as being from France and England. We know that if anything from India or elsewhere is going to be popular, we're going to be copying it in Europe and eventually in America to make it our own domestic manufacture and not be competing with imports. So, and this one, they say, is made in Pennsylvania. So eventually we were copying this. And so these are two other fragments in the DAR collection, and they're much smaller scale. And, you know, I think it's conceivable they're a little bit in the realm of possibility of having been produced locally, especially because you have one that has the initials of someone. And I don't think you would have sent all the way to India to say, hey, put an MH on my indigo. So I don't know. We can talk about this in the discussion. Here you go. But it's much simpler and smaller scale than our design in the quilt. So there you go. Research always continues, and you have to remember to consult recent sources, and because what we think evolves over the decades. If you just went back and looked at the Indigo Blues book or the Katzenberg book, you might say, oh, these were made in America, but you have to make sure that recent scholarship hasn't reevaluated things. And our opinions evolve, and we're not trying to be misleading. It's just that, you know, and someone might not agree with me about or Amelia Peck. So the debate perhaps is going on, but that's what I have to say.
Who gets to talk first? I have a question about the Pennsylvania example. Do you have any idea when that was produced?
You know, I didn't note all the details from the cataloging on the Winter Tour website. I think I can probably get back to you shortly about that. If you wanted me to start looking it up, I could do that.
Well, I'm just curious. It's not
Lynn, somewhere in my files, if I can
burning
find
need.
it, Linda Eaton has published an article on those Pennsylvania blue resists. So, and my memory is it's somewhere like north of Philadelphia, which seems like an odd place for it to be. You would think if they're going to experiment, it would be in South Carolina where there is. But I will see if I can dig that out.
That would be great. I remember reading years and years and years ago, Stafford and Bishop was one early publication that said that these were really a Hudson River Valley
Yeah.
preference.
Yeah.
And I just want to throw out there that there are 2 examples from the Wilbur family of Swansea, Massachusetts in the Old Sturbridge Village collection. So there's some documented examples that are not Hudson River Valley.
Okay, yes. No, I think there's just a large cluster from the Hudson Valley, but that's not to say they're all from there. It's just that there's a noticeable cluster. And so ours, seems to be one of those. I just looked it up on Winter Tour's website, hooray for the internet, and it says 1770 to 1790, just like our quilt for that textile fragment. And of course, indigo continues to be popular, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think it's interesting that this debate has gone on, and all these different books have different ideas and theories. And I think they do look Indian, and I think it makes sense that they're from India. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I find it interesting that Pennsylvania one seemed much more in a fashionable pattern than the others. The others still have that really heavy kind of Baroque feeling aesthetic about them, but the Pennsylvania was striped and lighter and more federal sort of looking.
You're right. It's much more in the Rococo, getting into the neoclassical aesthetic that is what you would expect and seeing, and what you're seeing in most other textiles, both furnishing and clothing, as we know. But what's interesting is, I think you're about to talk about bed rugs. Am I right, Lynn?
Yes,
and so those bed rugs are amazing because they're last quarter of the 18th and first quarter of the 19th century, and they're huge. They're huge, large-scale designs that are really a survival of not only Baroque but even Jacobean design. So,
yeah, that was actually kind of my thought, that here's another form where that really early design just holds on and holds on.
Yeah. So clearly, the colonials didn't mind this older, larger scale design. So it's kind of interesting.
Attractive too. It's even though it's heavy, it's very attractive for some reason.
Yeah, yeah.
You can buy great copies at Calico Corners.
Yep.
You can either make a dress or do your room. Well, yep. I want to say, moving it up to 1790 and positing that it's British commerce. Remember that England was not allowed to sell or print domestic cotton.
Right.
At the end of the 19th century, because the wool people, 18th century, the wool manufacturers said it was competing with them unfairly. So being British and very clever at commerce, they created a colonial and international market. It's interesting that rather than printing for the American market, which they often did, and talked about how less discerning the Americans were, you could print anything and they'd buy it. They are importing from India specifically, but that makes commerce sense.
Well, and I wanted to say it is interesting that we could get cotton from India during a period where it was forbidden in England. So this helps explain why you don't see it in England. It was threatening the wool industry, and so they weren't allowed to do it, and they were trying to promote a domestic cotton industry, which it did eventually take off. But in the meanwhile, for some reason, they didn't mind sending it to us colonials. So, there you go.
Great. Well, it's time for Lynne.
Ceramics.
Time for Lynne, that's enough.
Time to go.
All right.
It's my turn. I'm Lynne Bassett. I am a freelance curator specializing in historic costume and textiles. I have a particular love and specialty in New England's regional quilts and costume, and especially 18th and 19th century.
Uh-oh.
So I am going to talk about, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to talk about bed rugs. In our myths presentation a couple of months ago, I talked about how patchwork quilts did not start out because of the needs of America's early colonists, and that bed quilts were actually very rare until well into the 18th century. What most commonly covered colonist beds were bed rugs. Research by scholars in both the North and the South have found that bed rugs were the most common sort of bed covering. They could be purchased ready-made, imported from England, or made here. Merchants' advertisements, period descriptions, and surviving examples reveal that imported bed rugs were woven generally with a weft loop pile, and they were commonly solid colored or striped. And this is where we get that familiar phrase, snug as a bug in a rug. So you can just imagine bed bugs being nice and cozy down there in the nap of a bed rug. There are strong regional characteristics of bed rugs made on this side of the Atlantic. Southern bed quilts tend to be woven like this with that supplementary weft loop pile. And northern bed rugs tend to be embroidered. This is the earliest surviving bed rug identified so far. This was made by Mary Avery of North Andover, Massachusetts, in what was at the time Massachusetts Bay Colony, and it is dated 1722, right there. Thankfully, it was a common practice for the makers of embroidered bed rugs to add the date to their design. Before I go any further, let me explain what a bed rug is and what it is not. This is not a bed rug. This is an embroidered blanket bed cover, and it's embroidered on a wool background, and you can see that the foundation fabric right there, you can see it. With a bed rug, the entire surface is covered with embroidery stitches. You cannot see the backing fabric. And if it's a woven bed rug, the entire surface is covered with the loops, or some of them are actually made like a oriental rug with knots too. But in any case, the entire surface is covered. So let's focus on the embroidered bed rugs. These were commonly made with a looped running stitch, which early historians of these artifacts misidentified as hooking, but it was done with a needle and bundles of yarn through the base fabric, which was typically a wool blanket. So the stitches could be left looped, or they could be cut, as we see in this example. They could also be flat embroidered, which I'll show you in a minute. In preparation for my exhibition that's coming up at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, Connecticut, opening in February, I've been researching the bed rugs of New London County. This area is located between Long Island Sound, the Connecticut River, and the Rhode Island border, and it turns out to have been a major center for domestic rug production. I did a survey of every known American embroidered bed rug, and thanks to Alden for sharing her research folder on this too. And I found a total of 63, and at least 35 were made in Connecticut, and 3 more are clearly stylistically related to Connecticut. And of those 38 definite or likely Connecticut bed rugs, 31 definitely or probably were made in New London County. So basically half of all known embroidered American bed rugs were made in New London County. There's several distinctive styles of New London County bed rug, the most common being this design with a large central pot of flowers surrounded by a border of reverse curved, undulating flowering vines. The most famous bed rugs are the four here that were made by members of possibly friends of the Foote family of Colchester. This one is Elizabeth Foote. That's at the Connecticut Historical Society. This is Mary Foote. That's at Winterthur. This is Abigail Foote. This is at Historic Deerfield. And this a few years ago was auctioned. And it's believed to have been made by Hannah Otis, who was a friend of the Foote sisters. And it's in a private collection. So I just wanted to point out how the basic design is so similar here. You've got the flowering pot of flowers with the undulating vine, but you have a very different colorway and a different stitching technique of these rugs. This is the Mary Foote rug, and I have a detail here. You can see how it's a darning pattern that creates different designs within the motifs. This is an idea based on black work embroidery, which was a fashionable 16th century embroidery design. You can see how different patterns fill the various parts of the motifs, very much like this. So this idea for the embroidery was translated into papers, printed papers that colonists could find on the inside of trunks and other forms. So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the Foote bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug. And these ideas are coming out of 17th century, very high style. And like I was saying with Alden, these very high style Renaissance designs are filtering down to the New England rural population, and they become traditional for bed covering designs in whole cloth and in bed rugs. So here you see this design from the 1650s, very high style, and how very much that idea relates and if I was a true art historian, I would say debased on this whole cloth quilt design. And so here's another, this is quite an early bed rug from 1741, Stonington, Connecticut. And look how well it relates to this quite early whole cloth quilt from Massachusetts, where you have that framed center medallion. They're just these designs that are just traditional for bed covers, whether it's a bed rug or a quilt. Here is Julie. I think you know this one.
I do indeed.
Yes, Julie received this from a picker who found it at a tag sale in California, as I recall.
Flea market.
A flea market, which just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here we have another type of Connecticut bed rug that come out of the Norwich area. There are 4 of these that I have found now. And look at that pattern. Oh, and see how this one is created with a flat running stitch as opposed to a looped running stitch. And it's very akin to the melon patch or orange peel quilt block. And then here's another one of these Norwich bed rugs with that scallop pattern that is also popularly seen in early patchwork quilts. And so that is what I have for you. Thoughts, comments? Anybody
I
else
just-
out there know more more bed quilts I need to know about?
Well,
I've got six. I've got six.
Oh,
No. I've never even seen one, I don't think.
Lynn, Lynn, I just want to point out that those drawings were done by you from
Yeah.
Cloth Quilts, so that the audience knows what those black and white line drawings were.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I started drawing these quilts back when I was a curator at Old Sturbridge Village, and I had stacks and stacks of these whole cloth quilts to try and understand. So this was like 1997 or so. And so I started drawing them so that I could really see the quilting pattern, which is so hard to photograph.
Yes.
And that's when I really started to realize that there are regionalisms in these whole cloth quilt designs.
Well, I want to say that's impressive, Lynn. That is impressive. Small area, well done.
Yeah, beautiful. I have a question about the high percentage, it seems, of the 63, I think you said that we know of. How many of them are initialed and dated
Well,
compared to quilt?
interestingly, here, I'm gonna get up and get a book. Hang on.
All right.
And then I have a question, a comment and a question.
Okay. So
When
this
we're done.
book just recently came out from Yale University Press. It's called Marking Time. And it's all about how in like the 17th and 18th century, it was just like the thing to do to date artifacts.
Hmm.
And then that just kind of dies away in the 19th century. So I think these are very much in that vein, you know, being mostly 18th century, and a particular type of object that just tends to get dated. And isn't that great? I mean, it's just fabulous.
For us.
But you just don't see it very often in quilts.
Yeah, not nearly often enough, darn it all.
Oh,
Alden, you had a question.
Lynn, yeah, I remember the DAR has one and of the big flowery types in very 1970s sort of olives and tans. So I was doing some research to try to understand the genre of bed rug, and this was before you, Lynn, had published your articles. So I was just kind of casting about and trying to figure out who had them all. And because I'm at the DAR, I did a lot of genealogy research, and what really struck me, and I made many different charts about this because I love making charts. There were a lot of family connections among all these New London family, the girls who made and women who made quilts. And you know, you'd have the Foote sisters and sister-in-law, but then you have, you know, Phoebe Dennison is the aunt of somebody or the niece of someone else, and then someone else. And you know, in a way, it's not a big surprise because a lot of them were right there in the town of New London, and they were in a couple of different parishes. And these are small towns of maybe 2,000 people. So it's not a big surprise that they all eventually are kind of only 2 degrees away from each other. But, you know, did you find it as striking as I did how many family connections there were, or did you just sort of shrug and say, oh, well, that's Connecticut for you?
Well, it's kind of both.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the points of this project, is to try to understand why there's this really strong heritage of outstanding needlework in New London County, and the family connections are undeniable. And and it's like, okay, in this generation, the Footes are doing fabulous bed rugs, and in the next generation, the Footes are doing amazing stuffed whitework. So yes, there are definitely family connections, and we're planning. I hope we're going to be able to do this on the labels. Is we're going to do little icons that show family connections. So like the Foots will have a little foot,
Oh, that's great.
and the Bradfords will have a little pilgrim hat, you
Oh,
know.
that's great. Yeah,
Those Bradford.
So
that's
that's
great.
an idea to show these connections.
And I think what also occurs to me when you talk about that is Susan Scholwer's book on Connecticut needlework. You know, she was really wonderful in exploring those family connections as well, and saying, you know, so in one generation they're making armorial needleworks, and in the next they're making the fishing lady sampler, and in the next they're doing something else. So, so you're doing things in the same vein, and so that's really interesting to see the generational shifts. That'll be really a great exhibit. I can't wait to see it.
And these are great pairs that you've shown, and
Yeah.
it takes years of looking and thinking about these and remembering to come up with these comparisons. So that is great. And it's time to move on.
Oh,
Well, I'm Debbie Cooney, and I love to research signature quilts. And so today I'd like to talk about some of the ones I've studied, and one in particular that belongs to Polly Mello and its relationship, if any, with what are termed presentation quilts. Last month, I showed 2 quilts made to be given as gifts to Reverend Elias Heiner and his wife, Mary. The presentation of Reverend Heiner's quilt was even noted in the local newspaper. According to quilt scholars, friendship or name-inscribed quilts seem to have originated among Quaker communities in the Delaware Valley of Pennsylvania and New Jersey in the early 1840s. But the fad spread quickly among other religious groups and other regions. 2 suppositions tend to crop up when 19th century signature quilts are discussed. They were made in anticipation of marriage, or they were given to someone leaving their community by relatives and friends. Fortunately, the myth of the 13 quilts stowed in a dowry chest for girls expecting to marry someday has been pretty well discounted by now. The various state quilt documentation projects did not find much evidence for this romantic idea. Quilts were made for brides, for sure, but each one needs some confirmation to support the attribution. And often, unfortunately, this proof is lacking. But by the 1840s, as inscribed quilts became popular, the US population was moving west at a rapid clip and continued to do so for the rest of the century. Quilts were given to Western migrants. Some still exist in private and museum collections in Midwest, Plains, and in the Far West. Publications such as Mary Bywater Cross's Treasures in the Trunk, Quilts of the Oregon Trail, and Quilts and Women of the Mormon Migration have inadvertently led to the assumption about the purposes and travels of such quilts. Too often, these friendship quilts are presumed to have been parting gifts without any means of later verification. In Maryland and Pennsylvania, where I shop, 19th century friendship quilts are still found right in the regions where they were made. So let's take a look at a few inscribed quilts made at the dawn of the friendship era in Pennsylvania. This reel, or Caesar's crown, in the collection of the Chester County Historical Society dates from 1840 to 1843 and was signed largely by residents of Philadelphia, the cradle of friendship quilts. It's very handsome, made with expensive chintzes, turkey reds, and other high quality prints. And repeating surnames represent several faiths, including Quakers. The 2 blocks at the center of the quilt give a woman's name who was married back in 1839 and perhaps an in-law, but no specific purpose of the quilt's construction is apparent. There are the 2 blocks, very handsome, very wide sash. These very similar quilts are signed, stamped, or inscribed for members of closely related Dutch Reform families in Philadelphia and Bucks County, just to the north of Philadelphia. Dates on both are 1842 to 44. The fabrics and block sizes in all 3 of the quilts are very much alike. So a pattern must have been handed around or a workshop was involved. At the center of Polly's quilt is inked Jane Cornell Van Ardsdalen, daughter of Christopher Van Ardsdalen and Jane Cornell, and the date of October 25th, 1842, when she was 36 years old. Her block is surrounded by those of her parents, sisters, brothers, uncles, aunts, and cousins. This arrangement suggests that the center block now denotes the quilt's recipient, a convention followed for many other quilts from this region and other places from 1840 on. Now, Jane did not marry, so there must be some other reason for this kind of recognition. The related Crewson, Ramsey, Cornell, and McNair quilts, friends, fill up this quilt's top. A quilt at the Henry Ford shares one Van Ardsdalen with Polly's and many with the same surnames also living in the Philadelphia and Bucks County area. Some of the calligraphy is done with the same precise hand on both. The name in the center of this one is Christina Grant, and it's sandwiched between blocks of a Presbyterian minister and his wife, a Van Ardsdalen. Several members of various Cam families, probably related to those on Polly's quilts, fill out the 9 central blocks. Ramsey's, Cornell's, and McNair's living in Bucks County are present here also. These must be cousins quilts, and I hope to find time at some point to map out these relationships. Both this quilt and the Van Ardsdalen Crewson quilt could be seen as presentation quilts for family groups, not meant for public gaze, like the 2 Baltimore quilts seen previously. As with the Chester County Historical Society's quilts, these blocks contributors had the means to buy or to make these blocks of lavish, colorful fabrics to memorialize family events, affirm generational ties, and or attest to family connections. The Crewsons were prolific quilt makers. The Mercer Museum holds 2 colorful examples. Adriana Crewson Craven and her young daughter, Mary Jane Cornell, worked on the Star of Bethlehem together in the early 1830s. The Alphas family friendship quilt on the right from 1847 to 45 to 47 includes 5 blocks contributed by Crewsons. 2 other Bucks County quilts include some of the same family names. Susan Underwood owns a top and Susan Day owns a quilt so similar in design and fabrics that they look like one when they were held side by side at an AQSG seminar in 2010. The duckfoot pattern is an early one of simple triangles and squares. Made with good turkey red prints, these quilts are modest rather than showy. The economic circumstances of these interrelated families, however, were similar. Most were farmers or tradesmen, so the choice of fabric and style were determined in a process now unknown. Susan Underwood's top was made in 1843. She has found from some intensive research that many blocks are those of Simon and Deborah Van Ardsdalen and their 12 children. They are directly related to the Van Ardsdalens of Polly's quilts. Susan wrote that the top shows the value of inscribed quilts as genealogical records, as it is the only document she has found that includes all 12 children and their parents together. More Van Ardsdalen's, Crewsons, Finneys, Cravens, and others are written on the 64 squares. Most lived in Bucks County with 2 signers from Philadelphia. A note pinned to the top of this quilt top states that it was made in Philadelphia and was a friendship quilt for, you guessed it, a bride in 1843. Susan has not found a marriage around that date relating to any of the subscribers. The sister quilt belongs to Susan Day and was researched by Gail Bockham when she owned it. Its 72 blocks dating 1842 to 44 are made of 36 different turkey red prints. Yet no names on the 2 overlap, and some donors lived in neighboring counties. The largest number of quilts signings on the Day quilt date from 1842 to 44. And the center block is made by for a Ramsey, who may be related to those on Polly's quilt. More research is needed to determine how closely the families at this top and the quilt are related. The pattern may simply have been popular for friendship quilts in and about Bucks County, as another quilt belonging to Marion Ann Montgomery echoes the last 2. Its 60 turkey red duckfoot blocks are set on point with green sash. It probably dates from the same time period as the others. Most of the locations are in Bucks County. The inscribed names are largely Finneys and Cornells, many of them buried with Van Ardstalens and Crewsons in the North and South Hampton Dutch Reformed churchyard. John and Lana Finney are identified as father and mother on one and by one of the other contributors, likely a daughter, Christina, and/or Marianne. There is a Finney on Susan's top, and the Cornell Van Ardstalen's connections are seen on Polly's quilts and the Cruson Bethlehem Star. This quilt's center block has an elaborately inked pair of swans, a romantic image that could indicate togetherness in heaven rather than an impending marriage. Marian Ann has found the block was drawn by William Hallowell, a doctor and an artist from Norristown in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and all seem to be in the same style. So in Bucks County, we see friendship quilts that affirm ties to family and friends, even if more specific purposes cannot now be determined. Whether presented to one person or kept as records of interconnections, these quilts remain as witness to lives and times.
I have a couple of things.
Wow.
So a lot of names, but
Wow.
but it's amazing that all of them
They're interrelated.
come together.
Oh, I have
They
two
connect.
things. Two things I get to talk with. One, those turkey red duck's foot blocks are applique. You start with a 9-patch, and then you applique red triangles in the corners, and nobody else does that. They became pieced later, so it's regional idea. And the other thing is, and this goes back to Lynne too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I had to say.
Just saying. I think that since you have swans on that last one, I think you have to call the pattern swan's feet.
Okay. Good idea.
Just saying. No, but all those connections are amazing. Talk again, similar to Lynne's family connections, all those connections from one quilt to the other. That's amazing.
And scattered among various institutions, Chester County Historical Society, to Henry Ford. And interestingly enough, the two of them coming together at an AQSG seminar probably wouldn't have known about each other if they hadn't come there.
That's pretty great.
AQSG, American Quilt Study Group.
Right.
Is interested in quilt history, look it up.
Join it.
Now it is time for Barbara.
It's time for me, who has to apologize for being green. I'm going to talk about a quilt that I used to own a long time ago. And let me share my screen. And we're going to go down. This is something I own that I bought, I think, in Missouri, a southern state, we say here. And it was not in good shape, but I'm fascinated by the pattern, which we all have seen many examples of. And it's got a variety of names, from Wig's Defeat to Grandmother's Engagement Ring. It's interesting that often this pattern is an all-over design with those little feathers in the sashing. But later in the 19th century, we see it as a block where everything's incorporated into the block. It's not, it's not a spectacular quilt, and it certainly fit my budget at the time. I look at it now through different eyes, and I kind of wish I hadn't sold it. But you can see it wasn't in great shape. It has the thing that's holding up the best is, of course, the white, and then the chrome orange that we call cheddar, that tends to not rot. It does fade occasionally, but it takes some torture to make it fade. And then this brown that was probably another color once. It could have been a lovely red, or it could have been a green or a blue, because those are three primary colors that at the end of the 19th century, when I think this was made, these are three colors that tend to fade to what dyers called dun, D-U-N. Also look in the sashing, the triple sashing. This one might have been red, the lighter tan. So it's a quilt that's been around the block, shall we say. But the most interesting thing about it to me, and why I'm showing it to you now, is her decision to make her quilt longer, in this case, by cutting these incredibly complex blocks in half and then not using one of the halves. This drives us insane. Now, when I do this, now as a pattern designer, I give them a pattern for half a block. I'm not going to have them cut across with their rotary cutter because everything falls apart. But these women thought nothing of cutting a block in half to extend the size. Here's another detail. I would say that it's probably 1880, 1920 by the fabrics, and I list some of the characteristics there. We have a group called Quilt History South, and we discuss all these characteristics often. So I feel pretty comfortable that finding it in southern Missouri and with those fabrics, that it's a southern style quilt. And here it is again. Now, I have seen, since we started the Quilt History South page 2 years ago, many quilts with the same solution to size. And here's a pattern that is continually chopped. And the thing I love about it is you often have an extra half a block. Where are all those extra half a blocks? Possibly in what we might call make-do quilts, but I've never seen a make-do quilt, half of these. What is going on? I can't figure it out, and I'm trying to interpret it, and I'm interpreting it through eyes. I didn't introduce myself, but where I saw the most quilts was when I worked in the Kansas Quilt Project in the 1980s, and we saw 13,000 quilts because we kept looking for a regional style. We kept looking for antique quilts, and we especially were looking for quilts made before 1880 in Kansas. And we spent 2 years on it, and we didn't find any quilts made before 1870 in Kansas because they were brought in. And I was so disappointed, but that really did give me a worldview of that Kansas is a crossroads of people who go to travel, and that the regional style is kind of lost when you get beyond Missouri, maybe. So here's a couple more that people often on the Quilt History South page, they show these, and it is what a solution to a problem. I never noticed the problem, but this is not an individual idea of how to fix it. This is some kind of community-related idea, and there's nowhere where I would think we're going to find that. I look at things periodically. My thinking is maybe those people who work for the EHU, the farm agricultural assistants, where they would come and do classes in canning and food preserving and quilt making, might have suggested this. But then again, I've never found anything. And they're gorgeous quilts. They tend to be from after 1880. We can tell that by the fabrics, by the style, by the fabric, like in this red one over here, where this was once a beautiful blue-green teal that has faded. And after 1880, there were a lot of very unreliable solids on the market that you see in southern quilts. And here we have the teal maybe in its more pristine shape, but you can see it's got other problems too. It's just not stable. And that helps us date these with solids to after 1880, maybe up as late as 1930 or 40. Now here's a wonderful example. My friend Nancy Hornback, the late Nancy Hornback, found this one. We just stared at it. Where's the other half of that block?
I think they're with my socks.
Yeah, in the dryer, somewhere stuck in there. I have no idea. Well, not only did Nancy find this quilt, which is in the Wichita Sedgwick County Historical Society, she found a family picture, and the quilt was made by Mary Parks Lawrence in Kentucky. And she found a family picture of Mary Parks Lawrence's daughter, and Mary's daughter is holding her doll, and look what's on the bed. Huh. Now, that's not the way I would make the bed. I would turn the quilt the other way. I don't know. Then I started thinking about making the bed and how much me in Kansas, as a very mainstream Midwestern kind of thing, how much we take for granted that people had bedrooms and that people made the beds in the same way. Mary Parks Lawrence lived in a cabin in Kentucky. And that's the standard rural agricultural housing in the 1880, 1930 period when we're talking about it. So then you start thinking, how is that quilt adapted to the way people lived? The smallness of their cabins, the efficiency of their cabins. Now this picture, I have no idea where it came from, just found it on the internet. This is the perfect illustration of how to make the most of small spaces. And she's got 2 beds, and she's got everything tucked in. She's got trunks under there, and this is how she stores her clothing, on hooks on the wall. Very typical. It looks to me like she has sort of a separate room, maybe with some kind of a divider. And then look at this. This is her quilt stack. I found a reference in Arkansas to a woman who had who grew up. They interviewed her in the 20s, and she grew up in the 20s. I mean, they interviewed her later, and she said my grandma always had a quilt stack, which she covered with a sheet because that was spare bedding. So this is how you lived. This is how you stored your stuff, and this is how you made the bed. I don't make the bed like this. And I don't cut the end off my quilts either. So I don't know. That's it, short and sweet. I don't know, what possessed them, but I think what we're talking about here is a complete. And Mary Kay knows quite a bit about this. I forgot to say in the last picture, the other shot was of the Walker sisters, who lived in the Smoky Mountain National Park. And when they built a park, when they decided it was going to become a park, they let the Walker sisters continue to live there, and they lived just as people did in 1880. And so I should, there are so few pictures, though, of the interiors of these cabins that are authentic. You see recreations in which they've made the bed just like my mom used to, 2 pillows, it goes over the side, it hangs to the floor. We have to look at how these people made the bed. But I think it's a good clue to a Southern quilt, and a different way of making the bed, in a different lifestyle, and a different way of using space.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I have to apologize. I told you I apologize for being green. I keep looking at myself in the.
You look like Andy Warhol's Marilyn Monroe with. But I think you're so right about how they make the bed. I mean, you look at some of these quilts, and sometimes the layout of the pattern is different at one side, and you can figure out it's the top because you say, well, now wait a minute, she didn't take quite as much trouble with her quilting, or she simplified the applique here, or the fabric changed and maybe she ran out. But maybe if she ran out, where are you going to put that second fabric that doesn't really match? You're going to put it up at the top where the bolster and the pillows would be. So, sometimes thinking about how it would lie on a bed and is an important factor in understanding the quilt. And you make a really good point that, once again, regionalism comes into play, and you have to really figure out the time and place that you're talking about to help explain something.
And not just the way they made the bed, but how the bed was oriented in the room. Is it up against the wall? Is it up against 2 walls?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah, we have some white works that are where the design just kind of stops on one side or doesn't have a fringe, and I'm thinking that was up against the wall. Why were they going to waste the fringe? You're leaning over to to tuck that in. That fringe is just going to get battered from all of that tucking in and reaching around to put it between the wall. Yeah.
In New England, we don't see those really large scale blocks like you're talking about there. So I don't think I've ever seen a quilt that's chopped off in that way up here. But what it makes me think of are the Northeastern regional preference, the stencil bed covers that are the really large size and design. And those I have seen really wonky designs that are like 2 different borders or the way they're turned is really funny on one side. And those, I think, are very much the same idea, where it all depends upon how that was intended to be oriented on the bed.
And when you
Yeah.
look at bed rugs, your bed rugs, we can just imagine somehow were on full display. Now, I know Florence Montgomery, when she wrote the book, you know, the book on American printed textbooks, she starts off with talking about beds. I just skipped that part because it bored me at the time. But now I realize a New England bed with drapes or a New England bed with foot posts is a different bed than even a Kansas bed, which does not have those foot posts.
No, the bed posts have disappeared.
It depends upon the economic level of the family and all that too. But yeah.
I have a question. Is it possible that those half blocks fell at the end of the bed over the bottom, so that the main design was on the bed, but that half fell over the bottom edge? And walking in a room, you wouldn't really notice it was half a block. Do you know
Mary Kay, you've seen more cabins. You know the Walker sisters. How did people make the bed? Did they put those half blocks on the side?
In the Walker sisters cabin, those you were looking at, those were feather beds, so that's a giant pillow kind of thing, mattress on top of rope bed underneath it. And then I think what's going on there is that they wrapped that quilt around the mattress.
Oh, so the borders don't even show because they're under.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have that's in the corner. I don't think they were just trying to get something on top of that. And that picture may have been taken, set up for the photographer.
But, that's always true. Always.
I still find it really interesting that they loved that aesthetic of the really big blocks. I mean, my thought would be, all right, I'm going to make a quilt that is 75 inches wide, and so I'm going to figure out how big my blocks are going to be, so that if I subtract this many bits of sashing and I'm going to divide it by 3 so that I have 3 even blocks. I personally don't think that I would say, oh no, I have to have these great big blocks, even if it means I then cut one in half. It's just an interesting approach to design, to my mind, that those big blocks were important to them.
And remember, big blocks mean bigger pieces, easier to applique.
That's true.
That's
You
what
wouldn't want your beautiful red and green applique with your vine border to tuck in. So they were obviously not made to be tucked in, because it would hide the very prettiest parts of them. And
that's true. In a way, a beautiful border sort of becomes a clue to how they made their beds.
Yes.
And I'm going to show something nobody would ever put this on a bed, I don't think. Let's see. My name is Mary Kay Waldwiggle. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I moved here 40 some years ago from Chicago, and that's an area that I love researching. Barbara, you remember when we did Patchwork Souvenirs in the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. That was a great book. We did it in about 1993.
Early 90s.
1993 is when the book came out. And when it was traveling, the exhibit and the book was out, and we were taught a lot. A woman named Lynne Garage Pardo from Coral Gables, Florida, called me on the phone and told me about the quilt you see in front of you. And it was in her family. And according to the family, it was from Uncle Lynn Mitchell. And he made the quilt, supposedly, and displayed it at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. By the early 1900s, He was living in a boarding house in Butte, Montana, where he was a miner. He decided to move to Utah to work in another mine. He died there less than 2 weeks after leaving Montana. He's buried in Utah. So supposedly a miner made this quilt in 1893. So the name of my talk is Solving a Crazy Quilt Mystery. We've talked a lot about crazy quilts. Even today we're talking about crazy quilts and random shapes and filling the canvas with lots of details. This crazy quilt mystery took some ingenuity, but a lot of the clues are right there on the front of the quilt. And I'm not saying I solved it. It's open-ended. There's still work to be done. But the last time I looked at this was in 2005. And it was interesting to pick it up again for this whole sharing. So the questions are basically, was it made by one man? And was it shown at the 1893 World's Fair? So this is the information. In the center of this quilt is a figure, a face, and around it is written 1893 Columbian Fair, Chicago. And that's the title the family has given to this, and that's the title I gave to it too. The man's name was Leonard F. Mitchell. They don't know when he was born. He died in 1912 in Utah, and he's buried there. And it was supposedly made for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. So now what do we know about the Chicago World's Fair? This is the earlier one, not the one that Barbara and I talked about in 1933. The official name was the World's Columbian Exposition, named for, it was for Christopher Columbus, and it was commemorating the 400th anniversary of his trip to the New World. It was held in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago beat out some other cities for the honor of hosting this fair, but it got delayed. In fact, it was delayed a whole year. So the dates of the fair are indeed May 1 through October 30th, 1893. So nothing happened in 1892 that we know of. Now looking at the quilt itself, the quilt dimensions are really unusual. They're 18 inches top to bottom and 96 inches left to right. It's a very large size for a crazy quilt. I think what else is very interesting about it is that there are lots of metal beads, tassels, and lots of metal things on it. And it has, again, some of that raised embroidery, the dressed embroidery, that the figure in the center especially has some tucks at his neck of his jacket. It's finished. Here's a crazy quilt this large that's finished. It's backed and it has metal chain link fringe on all four sides. We'll take a look at that up close. See all this metallic thread on the left and the tassels hanging off the top of the flagpole. And then all around, you could see a close up there. I call it chain link. It's crocheted lace, but it's all made out of wire. So here we go. We've got the quilt, and I like to point out that there's, it seems to be divided into three vertical units, 1, 2, 3. There's a cross here that could have been made. I'm just looking at the segments that could have been done separately. And there's a lot of things that do look kind of crazy quilt-like, but there are, this section in particular has some really interesting images that do relate to the Chicago World's Fair. And so what I did was circle these images that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And keep in mind this one in the upper left and the one in the upper right. We'll talk about that at the end. But here we go with the one in the center. a lot of people said, who is that guy? I thought, who is that guy? What do you mean? Well, when it was on display in Chicago, the family allowed it to be displayed at Rosemont Quilt Festival in about 2004, 2005. And a lot of people looked at it and didn't recognize Columbus. And notice also on this, there's some odd little switching of numbers. It says October 12, 1492, and over here, October 21, 1492, which can happen when you're doing the embroidery, but they left it. I looked for an image and sure enough found it on the internet, a contemporaneous image of Christopher Columbus. And indeed, it looks a lot like maybe the embroiderer enlarged this and used it as the inspiration for that image in the center. George Washington appears on this, the man that made this land. Notice all around it, again, there's metal beaded kind of braid surrounding the image, and these ribbons, red, white, and blue, a patriotic theme. And George Washington is the man that made this land. Notice also some kind of neatness with the embroidery. I think I could say that whoever's making it is making all of them. And then, back to the original, I'm not going to go back there, but I made some long ovals, and one refers in the end to the US side and one to the Spanish side. On the US side, we have Grover Cleveland, 1893, and on the right, the Spanish side, we have the Duke of Veragua. His name is here. He was a Spanish official, but more importantly, he was a direct descendant of Columbus. Both of them were there on opening day, May 1st, 1893. And then below them are two women. The one on the left, actually, if you look up here above, there are letters there. They're hard to see, but it does say Mrs. Palmer. And she was a Chicago socialite, a big promoter of Chicago. And with the fair, she was the manager of the women's building that held a lot of exhibits, a lot of state exhibits and places where there may have been some quilts shown. There's an unidentified woman to the right of her, and at first I thought it was Jane Addams of Hull House. But then when I realized that that was the Spanish side, I think it's probably Princess Infanta Eulalia of Spain. But looking again for these contemporaneous illustrations, I think this is where Mrs. Potter Palmer, the image was found again on the stationery, and this is a picture on the left, bottom left, in a newspaper. So whoever made the embroidered image probably got it from something like that, enlarged it, and then made it. But now let's go up to the upper left, and this is the place where things get kind of muddy. This is an embroidered block that talks about a horse race that happened in Chicago on June 24th, 1893. I remember it opened on May 1st that spring. The name of the derby, it was the American Derby. It was run at Washington Park Racetrack, which then was located on Chicago's South Side. A horse named Boundless won the top prize of $49,500, a huge amount of money. And then you could see right here, who's ever embroidered in there, $50,000. And the other two horses that ran were named St. Leonard's and Clifford, 1893, June. So, and then in the upper right, we have this picture. I thought when it said C.H. Harrison, it might have been the president. I don't know what I was thinking of, but here we go again. And I went looking online to try to find some photos of this man. It turns out that C.H. Harrison, Carter Henry Harrison, was the mayor of Chicago at the time. and he was assassinated on October 28th, 1893, in the final week of the fair. So, was it made by one man? Was it shown at the 1893 World's Fair? I'm saying, was it made by Leonard Mitchell? Well, we don't have anything that connects him directly, but he was probably not alone if he did make it. And I think his mother, Anne Elizabeth Hume, 1823 to 1900, may have made it. She was actually living in Illinois at the end of her life, although when she had Leonard, they were living in St. Louis, Missouri. Was it shown at the 1893 World's Fair? Probably not. More research in newspapers.com is needed. In 1893, definitely. What purpose? I'm not sure. And for further reading, go back and look at my article in Quilters Newsletter magazine. There's lots of good pictures and much more detail. I want to say again, special thanks to the family for donating this quilt, to the Illinois State Museum, and to the photographer, Gary Androsco, for these images. So, what do you think?
I'm wondering if the assassination date suggests that it wasn't finished until after the fair. Is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Now you look at it, and maybe those two are added after the fact. So what does it become? Is it a commemorative piece? Is it a memory piece? We've all seen quilts where people kind of put a whole lot of things together.
Well, you know, of course, first of all, Crazy Quilts, of course, put a lot of things together. And secondly, this sort of reminds me of some of the 1876, well, there were commercial things produced for that, the coverlets and things like that. You know, these world fairs were pretty new things at this time, and they were pretty darn exciting. And people, you know, hopped on trains and came from many, many states away to come to this amazing thing. And, you know, if you've seen pictures of, I grew up in Chicago, so the 1893 World's Fair was something we all kind of grew up learning about. You know, the pictures of that, I can't remember if they called it the Crystal City or the Marble City or the Golden City. What was the name for it? It was just
The White City.
the White City, thank you. And, you know, all these enormous buildings built just for the fair. And I think that the Museum of Science and Industry and maybe the Field Museum, you know, survived from it. But this beautiful, you know, area with the huge pools of reflecting pools kind of things. I mean, it was a big, big deal. And I think it was really very striking to a lot of people. So I can understand that, you know, in the height of the crazy quilt craze, you might go home and say, wow, I've got to commemorate that and do something about this. And of course it was, we kind of forget that the point of the fair was to celebrate Columbus and the 400, you know, for anything on this side of the pond, to have 400 years of something to celebrate was pretty exciting. So I can imagine that all of that kind of put together the idea that that was something worth commemorating.
Good point.
Are there souvenir ribbons from the
None.
fair or anything like that?
None.
No.
No.
I'm sure they existed.
Oh, yes, they
Oh,
exist.
sure they did.
Yeah,
But they didn't.
handkerchiefs and things like that. They're definitely commemorative textiles, but you don't see them here, which is interesting.
I'm reminded of Mary Gasparic, who was recently inducted into the Quilters Hall of Fame. And Mary Kay knows her family well. When we first looked at Mary Gasparic, she was 1933 Chicago, the next World's Fair. And we first thought Mary made her quilts for the fair. But Mary went to the fair and it knocked her out and it changed her life. She made her quilts after the fair. And
Right.
this might be another example of that, where you go and you you're overwhelmed by a whole new idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And then the size is so unusual. But
100,
the-
you said 18, it's 118.
no, it isn't.
Oh, how big is it?
It's
Can you remember?
88 top to bottom,
Uh-huh.
96 to the
Okay.
left
'cause
to left.
I
So
was
it's
looking.
90, it's more like a banner. This
Ah,
picture almost looks square, but it's
ah.
so it's not, it's only 8 inches wider, but it's more of a banner than a
It's also kind of interesting to me that it celebrates the people, so many of the people involved. You know, you've got, well, George Washington thrown in there, but Mrs. Potter Palmer, who was so influential and in getting things organized and raising money, and I don't know what all else, I forget. And you know, the president and the mayor and the representative from Spain and so on, but none of the architecture. There's none of the visual symbols of the actual fair, which you might expect to see if somebody had gone there and been struck by the beauty of that of the scene. It's kind of interesting that you got the horse race, but not, you know, not the enormous, you know, 5 stories tall picture of Columbia or whatever it was.
Yeah, it does seem to be more focused on commemorative and patriotism and politics of the day and
Yeah.
local happenings, the assassination, right after it, of the
Wow.
mayor, no less. And
Yeah.
the size of it, not really crazy quilt at all. It's just more like a banner is a good term for it.
Yeah.
I can't help but be, you know, focused on, there are no ribbons from the fair or anything like that. And as you say, Alden, there's no, like visualization of any of the elements of the fair. And so I'm just wondering, what is it? I'm not understanding what is it that makes you feel, Mary Kay, that it was made after the fair? Is it just that it doesn't appear in newspapers.com so far? Or if you said something else, I missed it about what makes you feel that it's after the fair?
well, I was trying to support or disprove the family story. Family story that's been handed down is that it was displayed at this fair. And I mean, I get a lot of calls, I'm sure Barbara does too, of people saying, I've got a Chicago World's Fair, 1893 Chicago World's Fair quilt. And a lot of people have looked and looked and looked, and there wasn't a contest like there was in 1933. If quilts were displayed at this 1893 fair, they appeared in state exhibitions. Even in the women's building, there's no evidence that there was a quilt displayed there. So I think I can say to try to disprove the family story. And they admit it gets muddied when you put look at some of those things. And they were just interested. They wanted it to be shared. They didn't want it to be sitting in the closet like it's set in the closets.
So
Well, even if,
how do you explain the figure of the guy who was assassinated in the last week? Was it added?
I think it was that, well,
Would it be added
well,
later?
I think it was, that's why I think it was made afterwards, or maybe
but
that was added in.
it doesn't have his death date or anything on
No,
it.
it doesn't.
That's-
And he might have been on there.
Yes,
They wanted it to be on there.
Yeah.
Um,
If Mrs. Potter Palmer is there, you know, the mayor might have made his way there anyway, along with McKinley and the Spanish guy.
And you
Yeah.
wonder if she even went to the fair.
what? We don't know that.
None of the buildings, none of the ribbons.
Right.
You know, if you Google or you do newspapers.com and look at displayed 1893 Columbian Exposition, you find many, many references. So you don't even have to bend. All you have to do is read a newspaper that talked about quilts that were sent. Now, I think many of them were never sent or never shown, but it became sort of a national, some kind of public relations or just some kind of bragging rights that this woman made a quilt that is so fabulous that it's in Chicago.
Mm.
So she
Yeah.
didn't have to have gone. She just might have read about it in the newspaper.
Anyway, I
Fair point.
also like to point out that there's a lot of millinery things on here. Like these are little appliques in velvet that would go on hats.
Ah,
Oh, mhm.
There are, well, of course, all that metal stuff was on soldiers' uniforms used. Well, anyway, some of you might know more about that than I do.
So-
But
it could, some of that could be on dresses too. I mean, they had a lot of heavy trim on dresses in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right. Or
And
hats, too.
unfortunately, we are out of time.
Or hats.
Interesting.
What fun.
it was fun.
Great.
And 6 nice little studies, I think, that we can talk about in Q&A. I'm going to go out and find some more images.
Yeah, stay tuned for the Q&A, and we'll be back with another episode soon. Stay tuned for that too. Thanks for showing up.
okay,
See ya.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
And the other thing I want to say is that I was fortunate enough to have a Mennonite mother-in-law. And she was raised in the very traditional Kansas Mennonite community. She was born in 1917. So when I first read this myth, I thought, here's my opportunity. So I said to her, you know, I've heard that Mennonites make a deliberate error in their quilts so as to appear humble before God.
And thanks to the work of G's Bent quilters, as well as scholars and collectors, many of them, the term improvisational quilts has come to be associated with African-American quilters from the Deep South through Texas and even to California.
You know, that's why I think one of the questions was, well, shall we throw out Ruth Finley? I mean, no. We all, I think, relate to Ruth Finley and where, you know, where she was in 1929 and where we are today. And I think we really want people to keep looking at the quilts, keep digging, reviewing some of these records. Like Alden, I really wonder if that quilt, that Baltimore album quilt, has machine applique on it. Woo!
and I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool.
This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Let me see about getting our know-it-alls in here for our live Q&A. I'm Tara behind the curtain. Let's see, I hear Alden coming in and Julie's coming in. Gonna have Barbara and Debbie and Mary Kay here in a minute. Lynn is on vacation, but I think the other know-it-alls can probably handle questions for her too. Let me just check on their cameras for a second.
Tara, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I think they're having the same problem I am, which is when I try to start the video, it says unable, try to start.
And now I can't. I think maybe we're having an issue. Sorry for the technical difficulties, guys. Give us just a second and I'll try to get their cameras going. Are you?
Host has disabled video.
Oh,
that's you.
have I?
That's what it said to me. Yeah.
Have I now?
It thinks we want to watch an older video or this video.
Or we can just be these voices from.
All right, we can answer questions without you looking at our faces.
Sure. Let me see though first.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
And so if you guys, while I'm looking for a way to fix that video problem, I know you guys can see the Q&A. Can you start picking some of the questions you'd like to go ahead and answer there?
Well,
Mary Kay,
Yes.
This is Julie. You have things to show, don't you?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to read something.
Excellent. Okay.
Why don't you read what you've got? Because
Okay.
it's good radio.
Okay. So you all heard the end where we were all kind of bouncing ideas around about that quilt. And I said something about somebody ought to go look at newspapers.com. And lo and behold, Barbara Brackman did, and she came up with the most amazing piece of information, which I think solves the mystery. Remember that, well, wait, first of all, she found something in the Butte, Montana Daily Post, October 9th, 1899. She found not only the name of the actual quilter, a woman named Lizzie Stark, but also a description of her quilt, which closely matches the one I've just talked about. Before I read the account from the newspaper, let's review the story. Again, the family said it was found in a trunk by Uncle Leonard. Hello, here we go.
Where?
And he died in a rooming house in Butte, Montana. They were told he made it. I didn't doubt that it was made for the fair, but I had a hard time believing a man made it. A man who was in the military service in Cuba in 1905 and 07 and worked as a miner in Montana. And according to the family, and by the way, a member from the family is on the is here today. Lynne Garouche is on today. Thank you, Lynne, for coming. Anyway, the quilt descended through the generations in the family, and it finally ended up in Florida, Miami, Florida, in the early, about 1940 or 50, when Gertrude, this woman, the niece of Uncle Leonard, retired there. So, but here's the true story. And there, in the newspaper, it said 2 charges against William Stark. He's a prisoner charged with stealing a quilt and beating his wife. William Stark, I'm reading from October 7th, 1899, Butte, Montana. William Stark got into more trouble in a few minutes last night than most men can find in a lifetime. Before 10 o'clock, he was locked in the city jail, charged with beating his wife and with grand larceny. The larceny charge was the result of peculiar complications. The article stolen being a valuable quilt, which was evidently made partially, at least, of World's Fair souvenirs. The spread contained likenesses of Carter H. Harrison and the Duke of Veragua, two men who were prominently before the people during the summer of 1893. And then it goes on, it says that Carter Harrison was killed that summer. And he then goes on to explain, the reporter explains the quilt. He says the quilt is made altogether of silk and belongs to the wife of this man who's in jail. And he apparently put it up as security for a board bill with a landlady named Mrs. Larson. And then it is allegedly he stole it from her, from the landlady. A little later, it is charged he beat his wife. That was only one. And then it goes on and it explains why she made this quilt. This is in another, apparently another reporter went the next day and they have this quilt hanging at the police station. And he describes it and he's interviewed the woman. During the World's Fair, the woman who is now Mrs. Stark was living in Chicago. Excuse me. She conceived the idea of making a handsome silk quilt to put among the exhibits at the Great Exposition. She worked day and night on the spread. Into it were put selections of purest silk, and on it appeared likenesses of Duke of Veragua and Carter Harrison. Some of the ladies connected with the exposition took an interest in the young woman's work and tried to afford her assistance, which would allow her to get into the exhibits, but the spread was not finished in time for the fair. We got that right. Then Lizzie came west and brought the quilt with her. She had been offered hundreds of dollars for it, but it was her own work, and she determined that it should someday adorn her own home. The young woman secured a position with a business house here in Butte and was well liked by her employers. She made a good living and kept the quilt. A few weeks ago, William Stark made her his wife, and the World's Fair quilt went in as one of the assets which Lizzie furnished for starting at housekeeping. But William, it would seem, did not appreciate the piece of work which had cost his wife so many hours of toil. He needed a few days' board, and the quilt was used as security for the bill. Then, if the complainant in the case be correct, now that was the landlady, William stole the handsome spread, and with him it went to the police station to be used as evidence against him. Mrs. Stark had to go to the lockup to see her husband and her quilt, and her honeymoon is blighted. We can't make this up. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
I hope she dumped him right away. You know, he took it, and then didn't he take it and try to pawn it after he got out of jail? He tried another scheme with it. He tried to pawn it somewhere else.
Okay, well, I suspect that he probably pawned it, and maybe that's how it ended up in the Mitchell family.
Yes, I think, you know, Butte, Montana, my gosh, so many people coming through, and but it's pretty fascinating. And that was just serendipity. I was not really looking for that quilt. I was just looking at 1893. Pretty amazing.
It is. So.
Yep. So we should answer some questions.
Yeah. Charlene
wants to know, how can you tell blocks were cut apart? Well, you can't. When I design a quilt that has half blocks, usually with on the diagonal for the side, I tell people to make a half a block. You don't want to cut a block in half because you lose seam allowance there and the seams come apart. So we don't know. And then Charlene wants to know where there would be one left over, one half of a block. But then you see those make-do quilts that have fragments. I don't know. I wish I had a time machine. That's all I can say.
Okay, let's see. How about one for, this one's actually for Lynne, but I think one of you could probably grab it for her. Marcia would like to know how far west were bed rugs found?
West.
Not me.
How far west?
Well, listen, I've never seen one my whole life.
No, me neither.
I've done some research on our bed rug, and I compiled a list that I shared with Lynne that she was able to add to, that she referred to. They're really a very New England thing in that embroidered version. Gloria Allen did a study of the Southern bed quilts, which may have been in Uncoverings. I can't remember where she published that. And she was looking at, but it's really an East Coast thing, because I'm not going to speak with great authority about the woven ones. Those might have gone further west, but I think they maybe got supplanted by coverlets. I'm not sure, but the embroidered ones are really a New England thing, and I can't even remember whether they go as far west as New York State with some of those New Englanders who moved to New York. I think it's really just New Hampshire, Massachusetts, huge cluster in New London County and Connecticut, and hardly any others elsewhere, maybe Vermont. It's really an East Coast thing.
And Joanne wants to know how far south. And Lynne did show some from South Carolina, but they're totally different.
Those are the woven ones. Yeah.
They're totally different.
Yeah, so, really not south of Connecticut.
And some people think of New York as south of Connecticut. So I think not into New York even.
Yeah, no, not that I recall. And someone also asked, I saw in the chat, someone mentioned that the sister-in-law of the Foots, and the Foots were all, you know, doing things together, quilting on the, embroidering and working on those things on the same day. Yes, they were. And Lynne published about those foot bed rugs, and so did Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich did a whole chapter on them in Age of Homespun. And Lynne published in the Dublin Seminar for New England Folklife proceedings many years ago. There were 2 years of proceedings on textiles, and one of them has her discussion of the footbed rugs. And yeah, probably one of them was good at the drawing and helped draw. You know, maybe they collaborated on the drawing. I don't think we know exactly who was responsible for that, but certainly, you know, there are other little trails in diaries and letters where people say, oh, so-and-so came to draw the pattern because somebody in the group was better at that. And then, you know, and that's who you relied on.
I saw a question from Jean Odom, but I can't find it now. I remember the gist of it though. I think her question was, didn't random shaped applique pieces start in England? And in the last episode, I did talk about the English quilts. The difference being between those and tile quilts is how they're cut and put together. So that grout illusion of the grout is what distinguishes tile or stonewall quilts from those other ones, which I think I gave a name to it, didn't I? Yeah, freeform applique. And it just describes what it is. But I hope you understand that in tile quilts, they're cut carefully and laid on a ground carefully so that the spaces between them are standard width all the way around. And that's not true on the English quilts. They're much more freeform and floating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. I was just about to bring that one. I was just about to read her question for you. So
did I get the right question? Did I?
Yeah, you did. You got it. You got
Okay.
it, girl. Debbie, we have one for you from Joyce Smith. Have you thought about the Mormon excitement about 1840? And do you think there might be a connection as there was in New Jersey at the time?
Well, it's been a while since I've read the book on the Mormon migration, but my first thought is no, there probably isn't. The Mormons, of course, started out in Western New York State. They moved to Nauvoo, Illinois, and they began their migration from there. The vast majority of these early 1840s quilts, from where they all started, are in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and a few in Maryland. And we know because a lot of them are dated first month, third day. So we know that they're Quaker. So that's where the vast majority of them started out, I believe.
Pam Weeks made a comment. Oh, sorry, Alden.
No, go ahead.
Pam Weeks made a comment that there are many quilts with blocks cut in half. I was talking about those Southern quilts but that's sort of by necessity. When you put blocks on point and you're trying to square it up, you must have a half a block unless you have just a blank block in there. And it's always so surprising, you know, who gets their autograph cut right down the middle. So we see that a lot. But there's a functional reason for that that's very obvious to us. You have to cut that block in half to fill out a square. The thing about these Southern quilts that are not diagonal is there's no obvious reason for cutting that. There's just no obvious reason. Now, I don't know if they're cut or, you know, pieced as halves, but it's still a very regional and very odd to us choice.
And it might be because of the size, you know.
I think that's
Lynne pointed out, that's a really good.
Those are big blocks, and that's so hard to put into words. Those are big blocks.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't, I guess we could like measure proportion or something, but the Southerners after 1870 or so really liked a big block.
It was faster to make.
It was.
I forgot to say when we were talking about bed quilts, Lynne asked me to read something she didn't get a chance to say as much as she wanted to after I asked her about Susan Scholwer's work in Connecticut needlework on the families and so on. So she asked me to read this because she wants to make sure she acknowledges Susan. I absolutely acknowledge the work of Susan Scholwer, author of Connecticut Needlework, Women, Art, and Family, 1740 to 1840, in my preparations for the Florence Griswold exhibit. I just want to point out that my exhibit asks some different questions than Susan posed in her exhibit and book, and I'll be looking a lot at design influences and crossovers and possible professional needlework, in addition to mapping out family ties, which is one of Susan's focuses. So she just wanted to make sure she gave due credit. Sorry.
Thank you.
She's very good at credit.
Yeah.
She's very good at credit, and we all want to acknowledge each other's contributions and assistance. So.
And
I have something personal to say. I want you to notice I'm not green. It wasn't easy being green, but I switched computers, but it took a long time to get all the peripherals up. And the other thing, Tara kept in where I said, uh-oh, and jumped up. I'm trying to housebreak a dog, and she came in and looked at me funny, and we go when the dog looks at me funny. So that was what the uh-oh was about, and I had to jump out of my chair. We're still working on it.
I have a question about Lynne's presentation that maybe Alden can answer. Or when she talked about the bed rugs that were looped and then cut, is that also called shirring? Shirred? I thought.
No, I don't think that's the same. No, shirring, I think, is something you see in
hooked rug.
in real rugs, like rugs for the floor that we would broadly call hooked rugs, but shirring is one of the techniques. And I really learned this from Kim Ivey, again, to give credit. Kim Ivey did a great little exhibit at Williamsburg, which I think may still be up there, on hooked rugs. And there's about 4 different techniques, and one is shirring. And you literally take all of these strips of fabric and kind of shirr them and then whip stitch them to the surface, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. I could have that wrong, but that's completely different. This literally is up and down. It's a running stitch, but you make a loop and then you cut the loops, and then the wool is so sort of coarse and multi-ply that it starts to fray, and it doesn't come through because it expands out of its little stitch, and so it's not going to go through the blanket after that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It ends up like it's just like velvet, or it's like a looped, a cut pile rug, a shag rug.
Jan Whitlock, the New York dealer, has written a whole book on shirred rugs. So she goes into it in some detail.
That would be the place to look. So Joanna Evans says that she has a crazy quilt with a blue ribbon from the women's building at the 1893.
Oh, wow.
And she reminded us that Joyce Gross used to have the most wonderful thing. I'm sure it's probably in Texas now with Joyce's collection, but it was a box with an address on it. Inside was a pillow, a crazy quilt pillow, and it had a ribbon. So that's what I've been looking at in newspapers.com, is trying, and other sources, trying to figure out what was in that women's building. And it's a big project, because a lot of people look down on quilts. It was just not considered the uplifting, important art that women should have been displaying. So we don't know. It's kind of very vague right now.
Well, as I said in conversation among just the 6 of us the other day, I think the woman, from what I've read about the exposition, the women's building was very, 1893 is just after the beginning of the progressive era, the new age of the new woman. Lots of talk about the new woman and who is this new modern woman. And they would have been planning, starting in about 1890. And you just suddenly in 1890, again, as you look in the newspapers and magazines for the phrase new woman, there's this progressive new idea of who is this new modern American woman. And she's going to college, and she's playing golf, and she's inspecting tenements, and she's working in settlement houses, and she's getting involved in, various labor and other political issues of her day. And she's a suffragist. And probably, and, you know, all kinds of things outside of the home. And so there really becomes this attitude in that second wave of feminism, or maybe it's still the first wave along with Seneca Falls, I'm not sure how we're counting. There's really this sense that you saw again in the 1970s, I think, of putting down the little woman at home doing the sewing. Because we want to get out of the home and we want to do more, you know, sewing and producing quilts and things like that. That's so associated with women's traditional role, and these women are trying to break out of that. And so unfortunately what that does is it means that they want to reject that and look down on it.
So you were saying, Alden, you were saying when we were talking among ourselves that you felt that it was possible that the explanation that it wasn't finished in time
Was bogus? No, I think,
Oh,
I think
it was me
Barbara
that
suggested
said that.
that sounded
You know,
bogus. Like, that
yeah.
might have been the excuse that she saved face, rather than saying it was rejected by the committee because the committee didn't want cute little quilts.
Yeah, that's what I
Except
remember.
for the horse race, except for that horse race. No one knew. If someone knew was going to win that horse race, they would have been doing other things, betting on horses. But that horse race was after the fair opened. You know?
Yeah, that's true. Well, so she had the opportunity to add that. That's true.
Yeah, and you can
All
always
right.
add to it. You can always add something to Crazy Quilt. Just put it over something else.
That's true. Are there any other questions?
Here's Alice McElwain wants to know, Julie, on the tile quilts, are they turned applique or raw edge?
I wish I knew. I'm pretty sure they're turned.
Yeah.
But I did look at the English one that I've owned a couple of those English freeform ones, and those, if I remember correctly, are not turned. But I think tile quilts are. I have mine downstairs, and I'll go find out.
Well, when Bobby and Carol taught it, and you turn it on.
Yeah.
I want to say a tile quilt is a very difficult thing to do. For me, I just could not do it. Now, Carol got all sorts of people to make them and turn out wonderful things, but the technique is not that easy. It's sort of negative. I was going to make a dachshund tile quilt for the book. I got one dachshund done. I thought, come on, it's just upside down to me. They're doing it backwards.
Yeah.
To me.
You know, I also want to refer back to when Lynne said that it could well be the precursor, the tile quilts could be the precursor of crazy quilts.
I think so.
Tile quilts do come around the same, most of them around the same time as the crazy quilt. They're mostly 1870s and 80s and 90s and into the 20th century. The 1854 one shows up, what, 21 years before, 22 years before the 1876 fair.
It's mysterious.
Yeah.
And then the other one's 1870, and nobody was making crazy quilts in 1870s.
Yeah.
I think you got a point there.
What are you to make?
It might be the nature. It might again be the nature of fabric. You know, these are not, maybe somebody came up with the idea of doing that on their own. The fact that they seem kind of outliers. I don't know.
Well, the documented tile quilts, American Tile Quilts Center in Connecticut. So maybe it was a regional thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they just weren't made in other places.
Hey, Tara.
More to be done.
Tara, is there a reading list attached?
There's no way to attach one to the Zoom webinar. I'll be sending out the reading list with the recording, the link to the recording. So that gives me a good opportunity to mention that I will have the recording out to everyone in a couple of days. So if you have attended or you have a ticket, even if you weren't able to make it tonight, you will have this recording lifetime access. I will email that to everyone in just a couple of days.
And don't bug Tara if it isn't there in 24 hours or even 48. She will.
We try not to ever bug Tara. She does such a good job.
And we're going to AQSG soon. So
yes,
she is too.
Yes, next week, a week from today, I leave. I don't know when you guys go. but-
Well, I noticed that there were a lot of comments about how the sound it wasn't working well. I myself bought just today, probably outside on my porch right now, an over-the-head mic, which I used on one of when I was with Joe Cunningham. I used his, and I think it worked out really well. And I think maybe, you know, it wasn't a lot of money. It was like, I don't know, $30 or something. And if it works for me, if I sound better, I'm going to tell you guys what I bought.
Good.
All
Well,
right,
I
great.
sound better because I'm on a different computer with a different microphone. I was using my laptop and it's pretty old. And you can see how the camera was deteriorating to Peter Max kind of colors.
Yeah.
So I think we can keep working on the technical thing. That's not
Yeah.
our fortune. That's why we have Tara.
That's why we have Tara. Yeah.
And there's only so much I can do.
You know, the poor woman is trying to fix us.
I'm trying.
Right? She was, oh, good.
We're
I
getting
love it.
there. We're getting there. We are. Hey, you know, the thing is though, you guys share so much incredible knowledge with all of us that and I'd probably sit through about anything.
Well, we're gonna give you a kiss and buy you a drink next week when we see you.
Yeah.
All right.
Virginia.
I
All
did
right.
see a few comments saying that we were better this week, so that's good. Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I wanted to read this one from Anne. She said, "These ladies are way underpaid, but tremendously appreciated."
We're not in this for the money, kids.
We'll take the money.
We'll
We'll
take
take the
the
money. But you know, we are underpaid, but when we get a million subscribers,
I
I think
think-
it'll be great. Tell your
I
friends.
do think I think it's interesting. Most of us are retired, older, and like we said, well, like my example, I mean, to pick up that research that was a favorite story, and I dug so deep for so many years, and suddenly, what, 15, 17 years has passed, and I've got newspapers.com now and all kinds of things, and I just love the fact that we're doing this because it does make us, you know, dig back, revise. And I think that's a good point for everybody.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And to run it by you guys, you know, us guys,
Right.
who come at this from several different points of view and experience. Yeah, it's great.
Well, guys, I think we're really out of time for tonight, but for everyone in the audience who had a burning question that we didn't get to, you're welcome to email us at 6knowitalls@gmail.com unless you have one of the know-it-alls email address already on file. Then you can email them directly, but I can be sure that they get it if you send it to 6knowitalls@gmail.com. I do want to mention that our next episode will air on Wednesday, September 22nd. We'll be doing it a little bit after our normal cadence for September because all things going well, I should be in Ireland during our normal airtime with my mom. So the know-it-alls have graciously accepted a later date for that. So
And we have a guest know-it-all because
We have two guests. We have
two
two
guest
Yes.
know-it-alls.
yes, we will
Because
have
it's vacation time. If
Susan Price Miller, is that correct?
Yes.
And we will
Rhonda.
have
Rhonda.
back. Who Rhonda joined us for Q&A. She was a guest for Q&A last episode for episode 5. And she'll be back for episode 7 in September.
we fun.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for
Bye.
joining us tonight. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.